It's August 28, 2021. I'm Todd Dunn, and today I am aboard my 1936 wooden powerboat Tortuga, and I want to talk about anchoring. Now, I'm underway right now. I just cast off the dock, and the plan is to nip over into an adjacent cove and anchor the boat. And while I'm doing that, we'll talk about how we go about anchoring a boat and some of the considerations. So let me get out of this relatively tight area I'm in right now, right next to the marina, and then we'll come back and chat about anchoring. Now, while we're anchoring Tortuga, I'm going to use a fair amount of sort of nautical jargon related to anchoring. And for those bits of jargon to make more sense to you, I thought I'd use this little diagram which illustrates most of the terms. And in this diagram we can see the boat. I put a little outline drawing of Tortuga up here, and from the bow of Tortuga there is a curved line going down to the bottom. That's the anchor road, where anchor road is a generic term for whatever you've got connecting the anchor to the boat. It can be a piece of chain, which we call an all-chain road. It could be a piece of rope, which we call an all-rope road. Or it could be what we call a combination road, which is sort of halfway in between a bit of chain and a bit of rope. Just how much of each is up to you. A lot of people only use a very short piece of chain, maybe 6 feet, just to keep the anchor on the bottom a little better. And some people use a piece of chain about equal to the length of the boat, and the rest rope. Now, rope roads have a couple of advantages over all chain road, and that is they're easier to haul up if you're hauling it up by hand, easier on the hands, and lighter. And they put less weight in the bow of the boat, and that's a good thing for reasons I won't go into here. Now, chain roads also have some benefits. An all-chain road is much heavier than an all-rope road, which means that unless the wind is blowing pretty hard, most of the chain will be lying on the bottom and will be assisting in keeping the boat where you anchor it. Now, how long should the anchor road be? Well, a couple of things go into that. One is, how deep is the water? And how high is the bow of the boat, where the anchor road attaches to the boat, above the water? If we add those two numbers together, take the length of the anchor line or road and divide it by the water depth plus the height from the water line up to the bow, that ratio is what we call scope. And scope is a term that we use to determine how long the anchor road between the anchor and the boat needs to be. Now, if you have, and it varies with the type of road that you have. If you have an all-chain road and you're staying overnight, you'd like that ratio to be about 4 to 1. In other words, the length of your all-chain road between the anchor and the bow of the boat should be about 4 times the depth of the water plus the height to the bow of the boat. If you're using an all-rope road, that ratio should be about 7 to 1. And if you're using a combination road with some rope and some chain, it'll be between those two numbers. And where exactly will depend on the ratio of rope to chain. And now this is for settled conditions. If it's blowing hard, you probably want to increase the scope ratio a little bit. How much depends on just how hard it's blowing. Another consideration is, how long are you going to be staying anchored at a given place? If you're just going to drop the anchor to have lunch or something like that, or just be there for a little while, you can use a scope ratio that's smaller than the ratio you would use for an overnight stay or if you were going to leave the boat. And typically, you might want to use a 2-to-1 ratio for an all-chain rode and maybe a 3.5 or 4-to-1 ratio for an all-rope rode, and something in between for a combination rode. And this brings up another factor. If we look at the distance between the anchor and the bow of the boat, this is what we call the swing radius. And if your anchor stays put in the bottom and the wind or current changes, the boat will swing with a radius equal to the swing radius. And you do not want to be closer to a hazard than your swing radius, or you could end up hitting that hazard when the boat swings. Okay, so that covers some of the terms we're going to use. Water depth plus height to the bow from the water, anchor rode, and length of anchor rode expressed as scope, which is the ratio of the length of the anchor line to the water depth plus height above the water of the bow. Okay, let's go and actually anchor Tortuga. Okay, when we're talking about anchoring, there are a number of considerations that go into anchoring the boat and the details of how you're going to anchor. Now, those include the depth of the water you're anchoring in. Is the area you're anchoring in tidal? If so, you have to take the tide and the tide range into account when you are talking about depth of water. For example, today here in Southwest Harbor, the tidal range is about 10 feet and high tide is in about half an hour. So if I went over here and dropped my anchor in a spot that was 10 feet deep in the next 30 minutes, well, at the next low tide, I'd be sitting on the bottom because it'd be zero water there. So what I want to do is pick a spot where there'll be enough water at low tide for the boat to remain floating. And you can use your chart to do that. The charts have the depth at mean lower low water, which is basically low tide. And so if the chart says there's 10 feet of water there, that means 10 feet of water at low tide. And today that spot would have about 20 feet of water at high tide. So we're gonna head over into this cove here. This is where we're going, this cove over here. This is just on the north side of Southwest Harbor proper. This land here is Clark Point, and up here toward the end of the cove, it gets fairly shallow. So we're going to go up there to a spot that's about 20 feet deep, and that's where we're going to anchor. Now, another consideration when you're near moorings is you want to make sure you're pretty far from a mooring, because you do not want your anchor to hang up on part of a mooring, on the bottom chain or any piece of chain associated with the mooring. That can be really bad, and that it can be almost impossible to get the anchor back up. So anyway, we're going to pick a spot out here where it is approximately 20 feet deep, and we'll put the anchor down. So another consideration on how much is what kind of anchor line you have. Now, I'm using anchor line as a generic term. It refers to, it could be all rope, it could be all chain, or it could be a mix of rope and chain. So my intent today, so if you have all chain, you need less anchor line out than if you have all rope, because the weight of the chain itself helps with your anchoring. But still, how much? Well, the rule of thumb for an all-chain anchor rode, if you're planning to stay overnight, is to put out anchor line with a length equal to 4 times the depth of the water plus the height of the attachment point of the anchor line on the bow of your boat, and that ratio is called scope. So I want to shoot for a scope of about 4 to 1 if I'm going to be anchored there for a while with all chain. With all rope, the scope is typically 7 to 1 if you're going to be there for a while. And if you're just going to be there for a lunch stop or just something like what I'm doing today, you don't need as much anchor rode, and I'm going to consequently go with about a 2 to 1 ratio of anchor line length to depth of water plus the height of my bow above the water. Now my bow is about 5 feet above the water, so if I anchor in a spot that's 20 feet deep, I'm going to use 20 plus 5 or 25 feet as my number for calculating, and that will be how I'm going to determine just how much anchor rode I want to put out, and that will be how I determine how much anchor line I want to put out. Right now I'm in about 18 feet of water, so that gives me 23 feet. So I want to put out about, if I'm going for a 2 to 1 ratio, about 46, call it 50 feet of anchor line. Okay, I'm turning into the wind, and I'm just going to come up here a little bit until I'm in the spot that I want and stop the boat, and at that point I'm going to lower the anchor. Now, you do want to lower the anchor. You don't want to go up on the bow of the boat, take your anchor out, and just throw it over the side, because that way you could end up with the anchor all tangled up in the anchor line, and it might not work very well. So we're just heading into the wind here, and we will, when the boat comes to a stop, in just a little bit, I'm going to lower the anchor. I'm going to force the boat to stop by going into reverse, and I'm watching the water around me. Okay, we have pretty much stopped, so I'm going to lower the anchor. On Tortuga, it's pretty easy. Right here is my anchor control, so I'm just going to push the button to down. And the anchor is going over. I'll let it go down for a while. I'm pretty sure the anchor is on the bottom, which I suspect it is now. Now I can see the chain up there on the bow. You probably can't, but I can see it, and my chain is marked with paint every 20 feet, so I'm going to put down about 50 feet of chain. So right now I've lowered the anchor. I'm pretty sure it's sitting on the bottom. My 20-foot mark went past, and we are currently in just 20 feet of water. So the anchor should be on the bottom, and I'm just waiting for the boat to gradually blow back a little bit, and as the boat goes back, I will gradually let out more anchor line. Now I don't want to let all my chain out at once, because it'll just end up piled up on top of the anchor, and that might prevent the anchor from setting. Okay, now I'm just going to give it a little kick in reverse here, and now that the boat is moving back, let out a little more rode. Anchor rod and anchor line are interchangeable terms, by the way. Okay. There we go. I'm pretty happy with that. And at this point, Tortuga is pretty much anchored. Now, one thing you need to consider when you're anchoring is swinging room. Are you potentially going to swing into another boat if the wind or current changes? For example, there is this rather pretty boat about 140 feet from me over here. And he's on a mooring. He's going to swing in a pretty tight circle. So I want to make sure I don't put out more than about 70 or 80 feet of anchor line, because then I might, in just the wrong set of circumstances, swing into him. And similarly, I've got another boat about the same distance away on the other side. So I think I'm okay as long as I don't put out too much anchor line. This one is also on a mooring. So he's going to swing in a pretty tight circle. Okay, so that's all there is to anchoring Tortuga. On a lot of other boats, I might have to go forward and control the windlass if I have one using foot switches on the foredeck. I set Tortuga up with the control at the helm so that I don't have to go on the foredeck, because it's a little tricky to get up there quickly if you need to. Once you've got the anchor down and you've sat for a little bit to let the anchor sort of settle on the bottom, you need to set the anchor. And that's done by backing down on the anchor, basically putting the boat in reverse and backing up until the anchor digs in and sets. Now, if you have a windlass, what you want to do before you do that is go up on the bow and attach your anchor snubber, which is a length of line, to your anchor line, and tie off the anchor snubber on a cleat, or in my case the Samson post, and then let out a little more anchor rod so that the anchor snubber is taking all the load and there's no load on the windlass, and then back down. You don't want to try to back down and put the load on the windlass. You can damage the windlass. Okay, let's talk about raising the anchor. Now, what you want to do is basically pull in your anchor line and get the anchor back up onto the boat. Now, if you have a windlass, you do not want to use the windlass to pull the boat forward. That can put quite a strain on your windlass, particularly if it's windy, and can actually damage it. So what you want to do is come forward toward the spot where the anchor is and take the strain off your anchor line. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, if you don't have a windlass, if you do have an engine, you'll motor forward a little bit, pull anchor line in, motor forward a little more, pull anchor line in. And if you have the windlass, you use the windlass to do it. When you get to the point where your anchor line is more or less vertical, you can just pull the anchor up the rest of the way, or sometimes the anchor, if it's been set for a while, will not want to come up. And normally what I do in that circumstance is I just pull the anchor line taut and just wait a while. Wave action over a few minutes will usually be enough to work the anchor loose, and then you can pull it up. Okay, so I'm going to motor forward a little and take the load off my anchor chain and start pulling the chain up. Now, if you anchored in a really muddy bottom, you might want to go up and rinse the chain off as it comes up if you have a washdown pump. or you might want to flake the line or chain on deck to get mud off of it. So here we go, pull up another bit, and we get set here. Well, for some reason my camera stopped recording at this point, but I did succeed in raising the anchor all the way and securing it on the bow. So I hope that you enjoyed this little demonstration and tutorial on anchoring a boat. It's not as difficult as it might seem once you have kind of figured out the concept of anchor scope and just how much anchor rode to use. So if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed for some reason, why don't you go ahead and do it? It doesn't cost you anything, and you'll get those notifications that I've posted another exciting video. So anyway, thanks for watching, and you should have another video from me in the not too distant future.